Someone needs to get this man some money because it's, I think, inevitable at this point, given the success of Baldur's Gate 3, that at some point Pillars of Eternity 3 is going to become a thing. And there's a brilliant article out right now. We're going to go through the PC Gamer one real quick, but then I'm going to put a link to the full interview here where he basically talks about Pentient and the work he's done and what he's playing and everything else, but essentially talking about how if he was able to get the budget that they had for Baldur's Gate 3 to make Pillars of Eternity 3, he'd be on board for that. And I have to say that I think, given the track record for what they did with Pillars of Eternity 1 and 2, if we were able to get Josh Sawyer and Obsidian Entertainment a Baldur's Gate 3 style budget to make Pillars of Eternity 3, I think it would blow Baldur's Gate 3 out of the water. I really do think it would. Because for me, as much as I like Divinity Original Sin 1 and 2, I liked Pillars of Eternity 1 and 2 far more. And this is a personal taste thing. I think that when you look at the storytelling pedigree of what Obsidian has done over the years, they've worked on beloved franchises and have created games that are I know it's a hard decision to choose between like Divinity Original Sin 1 and 2 and like Pillars of Eternity 1 and 2 because Larian Studios makes amazing games and Baldur's Gate 3 is this achievement that at the moment is impossible to overcome. It's like I don't think there's anything on the horizon that's going to topple Baldur's Gate 3. I think that you look at games like when you look at games as an art form, they have done some really crazy things with Obsidian over the years, from Star Wars to Forgotten Realms. I mean, just looking at the games they've made over the years, the voice actors they've worked with, there is a pedigree here that can't be denied. And it's not taking away from Larian Studios. Larian Studios has done something that I think for the moment is the cream of the crop, and you can't take that away from Larian. And I love Larian Studios, and I am actively petitioning for Larian Studios to please, 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 please get your hands on the licensing to make Icewind Dale 3 because I think they would absolutely freaking dominate the CRPG industry if they could make Icewind Dale 3. But the interesting thing about Obsidian is that world that they've got, the world of Aora, and they have Avowed coming out next year, which is going to be that first-person experience in the world that we've all come to know and love for Pillars of Eternity 1 and 2. But just, yeah, please give Josh Sawyer a, hundreds of millions of dollar budget to make Pillars of Eternity 3 in the scope of what we got from Larian Studios for Baldur's Gate 3. So the full interview is over at and I'll have a link to this down in the description below, but it's over at Touch Arcade, and it's a great interview. It's a really, really in-depth read, talking about all the things he's worked on. Really talking a lot about Pentiment, which if you haven't played Pentiment, it's not your traditional Obsidian game. It's a very different game, but from a storytelling perspective, this is a cool game. It's a really cool game. But Pillars of Eternity, for me, the world that they established, the lore that they established, and everything, it's really cool. But it's a really wide-ranging interview that talks about a lot of different things. Look at that map for Icewind Dale. I love that game. So much cool stuff in here. But the PC Gamer article, which is also linked down below, has a much condensed version, which I think for those of you who just want to read through the highlights, let's go through this together. But basically, the writer of this article, Andy Chalks, talks about how he finally got around to playing Pentiment, and he says, "Well, I won't spoil the experience here. I will say, wow, man, holy cow!" As I stare off pensively into the distance, contemplating the nature of existence for a few days. Says my main takeaway here is that Obsidian should just give Josh Sawyer a few $1 million every 5 years or so and tell him to come back when he's done, because he is a brilliant game director. I think he's one of those standout writers who has been able to create experiences that pretty much every single time he does them are home runs, even if they aren't necessarily commercially massive hits. I don't think he's ever created a bad game in his career, and I think they're pretty much all universally loved. What's really interesting about Pillars of Eternity 1 and 2, though, is that they were both crowdfunded, which means they were operating with a much smaller budget. We're talking a handful of millions as opposed to hundreds of millions. And it would be really interesting to see what he could do. So the Touch Arcade interview is where he talks about how he probably won't make Pentiment 2, even though he wouldn't, mind going back to that world eventually, maybe, possibly. But he said he would like to make Pillars of Eternity 3, as long as someone was really able to back up the money truck here. So he says, if it was an unlimited budget, I think I would try Pillars 3 because I know what the budget was for Deadfire, which was not a whole lot, and I've heard from multiple people what the budget was for Baldur's Gate 3, and while I can't talk about numbers, if I got that budget, sure, I'd make Pillars of Eternity 3. Now, what's interesting is he has made some very interesting statements in recent years talking about how as much fun as he had working on Pillars of Eternity 1 and 2, had he been given free reign to do something else, he would have chosen to make those games slightly different as opposed to going back to that isometric turn-based, real-time with pause stuff because he kind of wanted to creatively do something a little bit different. But because they were crowdfunding, they had to stick to that specific style because that's what the fans were backing. And that's, by the way, this is a big in my mind nod to people who responsibly use Kickstarter. Solasta is another game, Tactical Adventures, taking the money that people have given them to actually make the money that people backed, as opposed to Pantheon, Chronicles of Illyria, Ashes of Creation, Camelot Unchained, even Star Citizen, taking money from people for crowdfunding and then entirely changing what the game is going to be, changing the scope, making these stupid little games that no one backed because we need to make more money to make the main game. Nah, none of that shit happens with these guys. When they took money to make their games, Pillars of Eternity 1 and 2, they made the game that people backed. And that is business management 101. That is trustworthiness 101. And I think that this is proof that he would be able to create a a masterpiece with Pillars of Eternity 3 if he was given a big enough budget. And I think the interesting thing, if you go read the whole interview over at the Touch Arcade, he actually talks about how one of the things he wants to do in greater detail is turn-based. I think it might even be in here. It's right here. I'm pretty happy with Pillars and Deadfire, but I do think if it were not crowdfunded, I would probably make it turn-based. I'm not saying to not have a real-time with pause system, but I do think that the Deadfire turn-based system, which I can't take credit for, Nick Carver and Brian McIntosh, was really cool, but the game wasn't designed for it. So actually designing the game for turn-based with fewer encounters, smaller encounters, but much more tactical, I think that would be a lot of fun. And having awesome cinematics and all that stuff on top of it, that would be really great. Quick commercial break, everyone, to give a shout out to our first official guild officer, Bubbalonia, as well as all of the guild champions, and of course, all of the members who help keep me on the air full time. To join as a member, simply click that join button below and pick your tier, but you can also support with super chats on any live stream or premiere, or super thanks on any upload or YouTube short. Don't forget the Discord. Let's get back to the video. So, there's an interesting discussion to be had here because I'm a fan of the real-time with pause system. I prefer it to the turn-based system. But I will say that Baldur's Gate 3 was the first game that I've ever played where I actually looked at the turn-based system and went, this is really, really good. I tolerated it for Solasta because I really liked what they were doing with Solasta and the dice rolls, and it felt very much like a 5th edition campaign. But then Baldur's Gate 3 came in and said, well, we'll take what Solasta did, we'll do it with a big budget, we'll add cinematics to it, we'll add, a whole motion capture studio and all this other stuff. I think that I am, especially as I've gotten older, I still do prefer real time with pause, but I now have a better appreciation for turn-based gameplay, which I didn't necessarily have in my teens and 20s and 30s, but now that I'm getting into my mid-40s and I've played a game that I think really did turn-based exceptionally well, which is Baldur's Gate 3, I think there's something to be said for having that. Now, what's interesting is I think if they did that, they would probably provide people with both. But if they did come back and only do turn-based for Pillars of Eternity 3, I wouldn't be sad because I know what the first two games played like and I loved them. And he has an interesting commentary here in the sense that he says, I like doing more crunchy stuff with systems. It's just easier to make that stuff clear and work in a turn-based system. But again, I would urge everybody, if you've got the time, I don't want to go through the whole thing here because it is a massive, massive, massive interview over at Touch Arcade. Again, the links are down below if you want to go read through this at your leisure. But Pillars of Eternity is a great game. If you've not played that and Deadfire and you're looking for something to play after Baldur's Gate 3, I highly, highly, highly recommend these two games, especially considering that Avowed is coming next year, and that's going to be the first-person sort of Skyrim version of the game they've played. Also, obviously Larian has Divinity Original Sin 1 and 2. If you've not played those, you should definitely play those as well. But I can't recommend these two games enough, especially given that these guys went back and worked on the original Baldur's Gate 1 and 2. They worked on the original Icewind Dale 1 and 2. They worked on Neverwinter Nights, Knights of the Old Republic. Like, the guys at Obsidian have been around for a long time working on games that I have grown up with, and so I have a level of fanaticism, maybe, with Obsidian as a team that I don't necessarily have with Larian, because even though I enjoyed Divinity Original Sin 1 and 2, I didn't grow up with Larian. Baldur's Gate 3 was the game, literally, I didn't play Divinity Original Sin 1 and 2 until Baldur's Gate 3 was announced. And then when I found out that Larian Studios was making it, I went, you know what? I've never played their games before. Let me go play Divinity Original Sin 1 2. I got a package deal, I think, on GOG to get both games. It was on sale for, I don't remember, like $15 or something. And I went back and played both those games, and that was when I went, oh, wow, okay, yeah, these guys actually do have the chops to make a really good CRPG. And now I'm, sort of, and I'm cautiously optimistic that they're going to be able to pull off Baldur's Gate 3. And then I played Baldur's Gate 3, and I went, oh my God, you guys did it. Like, it's amazing. But I have a much longer love affair with Obsidian and Entertainment and what Josh Sawyer has done over the years. So please, just give him a Baldur's Gate 3 budget and let him make Pillars of Eternity 3. I guarantee you it will sell millions of copies and it will become the next masterpiece that people talk about for years and years to come. Love to hear your thoughts. Drop them down below. Like, subscribe to the bell icon so you never miss an update. Join the Discord. Check out the member videos up above if you are a new member to the channel. And don't forget the streams, which happen almost every single day. And all the other playlists and things we're doing here in the channel. Until next time, everybody, stay safe, happy gaming, and I look forward to having the conversation with you guys down below.